Hey sketchy friends, so it's been a while since I did a good old house sketch, and I feel like I have not given this Etcher cold press sketchbook a fair go yet. I've been so tentative with it that I've just done a whole bunch of rubbish in it thus far, so I thought let's try and do something I think might actually turn out interesting, might turn out well, something that's really fun to do anyway. So in this video, as mentioned, I am using the Etcher cold press sketchbook, which is 100% cotton paper, and it's the A4 landscape version. And then next up, I am using this mop brush. It is a Daler-Rowney mop brush, so it's synthetic hairs and it's just like a reasonably inexpensive one. But I'm using this because it holds loads of water and it's quite cool to use for this kind of technique. And then I'm also using my trusty old St. Petersburg White Nights watercolors. And I've just got this old makeup spritzing bottle and I just give the paints a bit of a spritz just to activate them, just makes them a bit nicer to use. And I've constructed this this kind of pot where I can just wipe my brush on. I've seen this in Maru Gores's Domestica course, and I found this old sponge the other day, and I had this old pot which had some hummus in it, which I'd washed out. So I thought, oh, okay, hang on, let me cut this sponge up and put this in here. And she uses this mainly for when she's out and about with gouache painting, and she can just wipe off her brush easily. But I just wondered if it would be a more convenient way to dry off my brush rather than having like a damp cloth hanging around, and certainly rather than using loads of kitchen roll. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see how that goes. I am wearing gloves because I'm really cold in the house right now. We don't have central heating, and it's winter and it's cold. So that's why I'm wearing gloves. So the process for this sketch is to paint first and then draw on top. I genuinely find this to be the easiest way to achieve that awesome loose sketchy look, and it's super fun because you get to be really messy. So if you haven't tried this process yet, I highly recommend you get your sketchbook out and start playing. If you want to try sketching the same house, then the link to find it over on Pinterest is in the description for this video. Okay, so the first thing to do is get a nice big brush. The biggest you have is fine. I always like using this mop brush for this because it just holds a lot of water. And as I mentioned, it's a synthetic one, a Daler-Rowney, and it's a size 4. I don't really use it much, to be honest, but I do like using it for this kind of process. So I'm looking at my reference photo and putting down shapes of colour that somewhat relate to the photo. Keep it loose, remember, and don't worry about the colours bleeding into each other. In fact, I actively encourage it. It just totally adds to the looseness. And this really is the fun part, so just go wild. Just keep a reasonable amount of water to paint ratio. Don't go too heavy with paint, otherwise it will be too thick and dark and it'll be too dark just to sort of draw on top of it. But also don't use so much water that your colours are so faint that they don't even show up that much. So there is a bit of a balance, but after you do a few of these types of sketches, you'll come to know how your particular paint, paper, and brush interact with each other. So keep trying this process, if you like doing it, as you just get better and better. There are loads of photos of cool houses over on Pinterest, so go find some and just get sketching. And in fact, I've got a whole bunch of pictures, photographs pinned to my sketching reference board. So if you want to use the ones I've saved, just go right ahead. The link to the board is in the description. I don't believe you need to be a member or you need to be signed up to Pinterest in order to see it. So I'm really loving this 100% cotton cold press paper in this Etcher sketchbook, particularly for the way the watercolor reacts and blends together. It's just such a beautiful effect. And cold press paper with this kind of texture is a little more challenging to draw on with an ink pen though. And I actually find that my fountain pen is the best to use as like the fiber tips of the fine liners, such as on the Unipins or the Microns, those kind of pens. They can wear down much quicker when you're using them on top of a textured paper like this. So any kind of pen that's waterproof, that has maybe like a metal tip or something like that is going to be better for using on this kind of textured paper. I'd definitely say this is the most textured paper of any sketchbook I own, and any of the sketchbooks I own that are actually labelled as cold press. So yeah, this Etcher book really is, you know, a true cold press. It's much more textured, and it's much more similar to like the cold press you'd find on a traditional watercolor paper, like the Arches block that I have, for example, which, to be honest, as an ink and watercolor artist, was probably not the best purchase. The paper, I find it just a bit too textured for me, to be honest, but it's fantastic for straight up watercolor, of course, which is probably what it's really designed for. Right, so once the first loose layer of watercolor is down, you need to wait. So I actually recommend going to do something else for a few minutes. It's kind of that watched pot never boils kind of thing. It feels like an eternity if you just sit there and watch your paint drying. And, you know, it will depend on how much water you actually used on that first layer, and also on your paper you're using, as well as things like your climate as well, where you are. But it took mine several minutes to dry, and I actually just went and changed the bedding and put the washing on. The excitement. But I came back and now I'm ready to draw. So I feel like I'm never really certain of what I'm doing or how something will turn out. So don't let this video or other videos make you feel like I know exactly what I'm doing. Many of the processes here are intuitive, and you can decide whether you like the end result and whether you want to replicate the process that I've shown in this video. As with every sketch I do, there are some things that work and some things I wish I hadn't done. And as usual, I shall make you aware of those things as we go through this sketch. So here I am drawing on top of the watercolor, adding details as I go. I am using my Lamy Safari with an extra fine nib because it's easier to draw on top of the textured paper with, as mentioned earlier. I am using platinum carbon ink inside the pen. It is waterproof ink, and I actually use this ink in all of my fountain pens. So as I'm drawing directly in ink, I use certain strategies to make sure that things kind of line up, at least with each other. So like the two windows in the roof area there, just making small dots just to make sure at least they're in line with each other. You know, I'm not going too crazy in terms of being accurate, as you can see, but making sure certain elements line up when they should do is somewhat important. And you can see how far back I am holding my fountain pen as well. I'm not holding it right at the end towards the nib as though I'm writing something. I'm actually holding it quite a way back down the body, and again, this helps me just to kind of stay looser and not too precise. So I'm just working my way down the house, working my way down the sketch, being aware of making sure I don't sort of smudge anything I've drawn. This ink does dry quite quickly, which is nice, but you've always got to be aware of what you're putting your hand in and that kind of thing. And I'm just going through as best I can, adding certain of the main architectural details, making sure I'm getting windows and doors somewhat in relation to each other. There will always be things that I don't draw quite right, or things that I can't fit in properly as per the photograph, but that's fine, you know, as long as, you know, the essence of the house is there. I'm not going to sweat it if I can't quite fit the sign for the house in by the front door, or, you know, certain elements like that. So once I've gone through the sketch and sort of put the bigger elements in, such as the doors and windows, the stairs, and sort of any like sort of plant shapes, I go back up towards the roof and start adding more details. So I've decided in my head that I think it would be nice to draw all of the tiles on the roof because there's a nice kind of varying pattern. So I'm starting with the kind of semicircle pattern that starts just below the window. I want to say gables. I don't know if that's the right word, but like the window, the pointy triangle window bits. There's like a stripe of kind of nice semicircle tiles there. So I'm starting with those, and then above and below that I'll put in the more sort of rectangular tiles. So you never have to feel like you have to put every single brick or tile in on a house, but it's just completely up to you what you decide to do. So in this instance, I have decided to do that with the roof, but I know I'm not going to draw in every brick on the wall of the house because I just feel like that would be too much then. It would be too much clutter, if you will. It needs a bit of space to breathe. So that's kind of a decision that I sort of made in my head loosely about how to go about that. So once I've done that, I have jumped back to the watercolor for no other reason than I felt like that's just what I felt like I wanted to do next. So I'm using a smaller brush, the rosemary dagger brush that I've got, and I'm just putting in some stronger colors into the plant areas, and then also those two posts either side of the door. They're a nice kind of vibrant brick red kind of color. And then I don't really know what I was doing here, so I thought, oh, let me start putting some brick details in with the brush, and I actually feel like that looked quite nice. But then I was like, I really don't want to do that all the way over the wall because I am going to mess it up anytime soon. Like, they're already starting to go off at a weird angle and it's just going to look strange and it's just going to be too much. So I kind of abandoned that idea. I like looking at sketches where there's, only some details have been drawn in and the rest is sort of left for your eye to fill in. I always like that effect. I'm never quite sure how to approach it in every sketch, but a lot of it is just by feel, really, or just by trying things out. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't, and that's okay. Yeah, I thought I would leave those painted bricks and then come in with some sort of the same sort of colour and then just darken up the walls basically and see if the bricks kind of blended in to that same colour and it kind of looked okay. I think it was okay, but then I just sort of left it and was like, I'll come back to it later and see what happens. I kind of had an idea in my mind that I might draw over the top anyway and those kind of slight brick areas, but yeah, we'll see. So then next I move on to my favourites, to the Faber-Castell Pit Artist pens. This step is by no means necessary. You can use watercolour or you can use colour pencils or you can use anything you want. I just really like these pens, as probably most of you know, and they just lay over the watercolour really nicely. They've got a bit of transparency and they're just really nice to create shadow areas with as well. So I'm kind of working my way around the sketch, just trying to decide which shade of grey to use. I've got 3 cold and 3 warm here. I don't really have an exact science of which ones to use, other than if I see that I've used a slightly warmer colour, then I'll use a warmer grey, and if I'm laying a grey on top of a colder colour, I'll use a colder grey. So that's pretty much my my only plan as to how to use these, decide which colour to use of the pens. But as you can see this sketch taking shape, it just really adds a nice level of pop to things, as you start adding these darker colours. And again, you can use that, you can add darker colours in whatever medium you like. It doesn't have to be these particular pens. So now I've got a finer pen, and this is a fine liner. It's a Copic one, but I'm not doing a whole load of drawing with it, just a few brick details. So, it kind of does the job. And so this is a 0.2, and I decided I actually just wanted to draw in some brick details with the pen in certain areas of the sketch and just sort of see how that looks. And again, I'm not going to do it all over the house. I don't want to do that. I just thought I'd add in the bricks in certain areas and see kind of how it looks. And now I have got a thicker fine liner, so this is a 0.6 and it's one of the Unipin fine liners, and I'm just going to add in some much thicker lines where I need them. So basically I've thickened up the lines in that railing in the top right window, and then I knew that I wanted to come in and add some of the railing details in front of the foliage at the bottom of the house. And yeah, this pen's really nice and thick, so it's quite easy to add in these nice thick iron or metal railings. And I'm not sketching exactly what I'm seeing in the photo, but I'm just trying to keep it nice and clean and simple so that it's readable that those are railings. And now I'm going back in with my watercolours just to add in some shadow areas where I can see some on the photograph, because again, this is really what adds the life to the sketch. So I'm just adding some shadow areas on those red posts in front of the house, and I'm just doing that with like a darker version of the colour that I've painted those with. And then also in between those posts, the door area is all in shadow, and also there's a nice bit of variation of tone in the main front wall of the building as well, like bits of red. So I just really wanted to, it was looking quite flat, so I wanted to try and add in some interesting kind of colour variation into the wall. Again, that kind of thing just really adds a bit more life to the sketch. And then I wanted to do the same in the roof, just to add in some different variations of grey on some of the tiles, just so it wasn't looking quite so flat. And just working my way around the sketch really, and just adding in a few details here and there just to kind of make things look a bit more interesting. It's quite easy to overdo this step, so just sort of look around and don't go too overboard. But you know, if you do, learn from it and then do another sketch. So I thought the bits of white across the front of the house needed a bit more interest, a bit more detail put in them. So sort of zoomed into the photograph a bit and just to try and see what was going on inside these white areas here. And I'm just doing a massively simplified version of what I'm seeing, just a quick sketchy version. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect to what you're seeing in the photograph. And then I grabbed my flat brush to try and make this shadow area in between the poles a bit better, a bit darker. And just because the red wasn't doing it, I needed something a bit darker, so I was using a bit of Payne's grey just to emphasise that a bit more. If you do have to go over areas slightly differently, areas of your sketch, do make sure that your watercolour from the previous layer is totally dry before then you try and go over it in a different colour, otherwise you're just going to end up with a bit of a mess on your hands. So, you know, if you feel like you haven't painted something the right colour, just leave it, move to a different area of the sketch and then come back later and go over it. And then here I'm just dabbling now, to be honest with you, and just wondering what might make it look cool. So I've got my white gel pen, I'm just going over some of the railings, just wondered how that might look. I do that in a lot of my sketches really. I just sort of think, oh, I wonder what that would look like if I did that. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, which is fine. And you'll see me do something a little bit later in this sketch where I was like, I wonder if that'll work or would completely ruin the sketch. And yeah, well, you'll find out in a minute. So here I'm just going around certain edges with a thicker pen. I think this is a 0.3. Just trying to make certain things stand forward. If they've got a bit of a thicker line, they'll stand forward from the rest of the items in the sketch. So I just wanted those window areas to stand forward a bit more and give a bit more depth under the roof area there, and also in some of the window frames as well. And then I've just got a red Posca marker just because I wanted to add a bit of colour to the plants that are hanging on the poles there, just to make it a bit more obvious that there's like hanging baskets there. And again, the same in the top plant baskets at the outside the window on the top of the roof there. Not necessarily what I'm seeing, but just adds a bit more interest to the sketch. Okay, so I don't know why, but I kind of felt like I wanted to put some blue in the sketch. And I was like, I wonder what will happen if I do this. So I'm using some indigo here. And then I started and I was like, I just don't think this is a good idea. But then I'm like, right, I've kind of committed to it now, sort of. And I don't know what I was doing, to be honest with you. I had this idea of going around those slightly yellow areas where in the picture there might be other buildings, but then I wasn't really liking it. So then I decided to do more blue, and then I really didn't like that. So then I decided to stop, and then I was like, oh, do you know what? If I'm going to do it, I might as well just go for it. So then I just painted even more blue, but then that's why there's kind of a hard line between one area of blue and another area of blue. So I was like, this actually could be a bit of a disaster, really. And I find a good way to try and deal with disasters is maybe invested it even more. So I was like, well, let's just go for it. And I thought, oh, I can always stop the video footage before the blue. But then I was like, no, actually, I just want to show you guys, like, it's totally valid just to mess around and like experiment. And I say that all the time. So then why should I be editing myself in front of you guys? So I stuck with it. So love it or hate it, the blue is there. I think perhaps if I'd had a bit more of a plan with the blue, it could have worked out. I don't hate it as much as I did when I initially put it down. So I think there's something there and, you know, it could work in a slightly different way. So yeah, good experiment because it's like, maybe this is something that can be explored a bit further in another sketch. Perhaps in this one doesn't work quite so well, but I guess it kind of fits in with the whole being loose and crazy and stuff like that. So I don't know. You guys will decide, make your own mind up, I'm sure. Yeah, now I'm just adding in some just more intense sort of bits of red on some of those bricks again, just to give a bit more variation. But other than that, it's pretty much finished and I do quite like it. I do feel like this is very me. As mentioned, the blue was a bit of a disaster, but that's fine. But otherwise, the house sketch is very me. I really like how it came out and I do feel it's very loose. And I just feel this sketch process is really, really fun. So I do highly recommend giving it a go. Really hope this video has been useful for you guys and that, again, it's inspired you to try something a bit different. And I will see you in the next video.